Hello from Cork.
Hello from New York.
It's Misha Moira Shanachie Corky. It's Maria, the Cork-based storyteller.
It's me, Jim, here in Fayetteville, New York.
We can't wait to tell you a few stories.
You know, I think we share a lot of weather because it's been gray and rainy. It's also been warm enough to walk in the rain, and sometimes it's a really nice thing to be able to do.
Yeah, Jim, I've just had the most magnificent weekend, courtesy of a fella called Barry McCormack of Brule, on Spike Island in Cork. So this is a little island right next door to our naval base, Jim, and just across from Cove, which was the last sighting of land for the Titanic. The Lusitania went down there. The first signatory in the Book of Immigrants went out of Cove, So we're sitting there looking across at Cove, and we're on an island that once was a monastery. That's how it started life. And then it became a prison. And now nature is beginning to take it back. So I'm in a different plane. I'm in a different mindset right now than we were the last time we spoke.
I love to read about stories and neuroscience and, in fact, grief. Those are big things for me. And this reminds me of something. There's a part of our brain that forms a sense of distance in three different dimensions. And the third one is surprising. The first is, how close is something in space to me? Another is, how close is something in time to me? And the third is, how close is something to my heart? The brain, trying to be efficient, uses the same part of the brain and the same neurological structures for those three things. And it forms them all at the same time. I was reading about this in the sense of, how is it that we still stay close to someone who's no longer with us in a very physical way, even though space, at least, has a greater distance? I think there's something really beautiful about the notion that the closeness that people feel is actually reflected in the structure of our brains. And that is something that is very, very real. This is something we know spiritually, but it's nice to know that it also comes to us in this very physical way, and we don't have to unlearn it. We can still be close to people who aren't physically with us, or maybe they're in a different time than us, but that closeness can still be as palpable as sitting next to someone in the moment. So I just thought of that as you were talking.
Well, the way they say we communicate in the space between us, Jim, that feels so important to me right now, because when I was on the island on the 7th of June, which was the Saturday, my father had gone from us 10 years. So it was the 10 years. Yeah. And in that place of nature, it reminded me so much of the place that he would bring me, the Holy Well in Sligo, that he would bring us to, where there was nature and trees. And I sat on my own, and there was space to do that in this place. The pace slowed. You could feel the space. You could be on your own and you could be with people. And there was a few times when I sat on a rock on my own, and I looked at the water and I looked across to Cove, and I could feel him, So it's amazing that this day you share that with me. And then also, no coincidences,
No coincidence.
Yeah.
None. And that's true for you and me. That we have this great physical distance between us. Not always. We were blessed to actually be next to each other for many days.
Yes, American.
But still, that closeness is there and grows, and it doesn't depend on space or time, really.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we spoke at the weekend about how the tone of a voice can bring you close, push you away.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's a real space, leveler. It decides, do you want someone to come in when you have the soft voice and you put people in, or do you shout, get back,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That reminds me, many, many years ago, in my first real professional job, I was a family therapist, but I was working in an institution for teenage boys. I had this supervisor who was brilliant in so many ways. He taught me that when someone is speaking over you, which was always a problem with the people, that you lower your voice and you don't stop talking. You keep going. And until finally the other person is so out there by themselves that they stop. And then you just continue with what you were trying to say, and you finish what you wanted to say. And then you go back to that person and call them by name and say, so Michael, it seemed like there was something you wanted to say. Maybe you'd like to talk now about what it is, Wolf. But yes.
I love it. Oh, yeah.
Well, I have a story I'd love to share. I'll say I have this ambivalence about telling so many Jewish stories because I have a bigger repertoire than that, a much bigger repertoire. But sometimes those are the ones that speak to me, and this is one of those times. And I won't tell you anything about the story, other than it involves a great Rebbe, but mostly the story is not about him. And his name was the Kutzker Rebbe. And that's because he lived in the city of Kutz. But he had this disciple, and his disciple's name was Eliezer. And Eliezer was just the sweetest, nicest person you could ever hope to meet. But he was very, very poor. I mean, even poorer than most people around him who were poor to begin with. Was married, and he had a daughter, and they just managed to scrape by, and things were okay, but hard, very hard. Well, until the point where it came time for her to get married. Now, of course, this was in the day when you paid a dowry. The father of the bride paid a dowry to have his daughter married. And there was a real effort to find both the right person for your daughter, but also an affordable person for your daughter. And that was what was kind of going on. And it wasn't up to the daughter as to who she got married to. This was something that the parents would decide and negotiate for. Well, Eliezer was such a nice guy. He realized that his daughter had fallen in love with someone who was also a very wonderful fellow. In fact, a really wonderful fellow. So wonderful that he was very much in demand. So there was a lot of bidding going on for him to be the husband.
I know this.
So Eliezer went to this fellow's parents and said, my daughter, I'd like to arrange a match between your son and my daughter. And they looked at him and his poverty. And these folks were not poor. And they say that was absurd. And he said, no, please, just what's the number? There must be a dowry. And they made up this number of 1,000 rubles, which was more than he would probably see in his lifetime. Just an unreasonable amount of money. And he was heartbroken because he wanted the right man for his daughter. Well, at that time, there was one fellow, his name was Avram, and Avram was the wealthy man in the community. And how did he get to be wealthy? He got to be wealthy because he never gave any money away at all. He held on to everything tight-fisted. We have a saying that he would hold a penny so tight that he would rub all the words off of it. And so this was Avram. And I think if you had looked back across his history, the most he had ever given to anybody was 10 rubles. And that was amazing. So the idea of Eliezer going to Avram and asking for 1,000 rubles was just unthinkable. But it was his daughter. So he approached Avram. Well, Avram sees Eliezer coming, this very poor guy, and he knows he's going to beg him for money, and he says, don't even start. I'm not giving you a single penny. Eliezer, in a moment of inspiration, says, well, I'm not asking you to give me any money. I'm asking you to loan me money for my daughter's dowry. And Avram looks at him and he says, I'm not going to loan you any money. You're so poor. How would you ever pay it back? And Eliezer persisted. Just a loan. It'll be okay. Now Avram finally says, how much? And he says, 1,000 rubles. 1,000 rubles? You're insane. You can't possibly pay me back. And it went back and forth and back and forth. And Eliezer said, look, I've got to do this because this young man is so popular. Somebody else is going to marry him. Really, he's the right one for my daughter. And Avram said, look, there's just no way. First of all, I'm not going to loan you 1,000 rubles. And even if I were going to loan you 1,000 rubles, you'd have to have a guarantor for that loan who could afford to pay it when you won't pay it. And if you knew of such a person who had 1,000 rubles to loan you, you would have gone to him instead of me, because everybody knows I don't do this. And Eliezer saw a crack. And he said, look, I'm sure I can find somebody to be a guarantor for my loan. If I can find somebody to be a guarantor, would you then loan me the money? And Avram said, only if I trust that he has the money. So don't even waste your time. And Eliezer said, no. Write me a contract so that you will loan me the 1,000 rubles and I'll fill in the name of the guarantor. And if you agree with the guarantor, then you'll loan me the money. And Avram thought this is completely absurd. But he also knew he wasn't going to be able to come up with somebody to guarantee the loan. So he said, sure, because his heart just softened a little bit. So they wrote up the contract. And Eliezer went off, somehow thinking that he's going to do this, but no idea. And Avram went into the marketplace, just kind of shaking his head at the absurdity of this. And his heart softened just a little bit more. And he said, well, there's no way I'm going to loan him 1,000 rubles, but maybe I could give him a little bit of it and make his job a little easier. So he thought, well, when he comes back, I'll give him a little bit of money. Well, Eliezer went home and suddenly the despair hit. I mean, how is he ever going to find this guarantor? And so he does what a lot of good Hasidic Jews do when he's faced with the problem. He goes and studies the text. And his eyes fall on one little phrase that leads him to believe that maybe God would guarantee the loan. So with that inspiration, he writes God's name in the place of the guarantor. And he thinks, yeah, this will work. And he goes back to Avram. Avram sees him coming, and he doesn't expect he's got a guarantor. He's, that he's going to try and negotiate some more. But when he sees the light on his face, he can't believe it. And he says, I've got a guarantor. I've got a guarantor. And surely you will accept this guarantor. And Avram opens the contract and he sees God's name. And his heart just broke open. And he said, okay. And he gave him 1,000 rubles. Fully expecting that he would never see it again. I mean, it was the absurdity had reached its peak. Well, of course, Eliezer was thrilled, and he went off and he paid the dowry, and his daughter was married, and it was the wonderful time. But there's a thing in Jewish law that says, if I loan you something and I don't specify a date by which it's supposed to be paid back, it's due in 30 days. It's due in a month. Avram hadn't put a date in it because he didn't expect to ever see the document again. And Avram himself had written off the loan. But Eliezer was a good man. He was really, really bothered by the fact that he didn't know how to pay off this loan, and the time is ticking. So the 30th day arrives, and in the morning of the 30th day, and Eliezer's just quaking, there's a knock at Avram's door. And Avram's servant comes to open it, and there's a man standing there with an envelope. And on the envelope is written, in payment of Eliezer's loan. And the man says to the servant, is your master at home? I'd like to give him this envelope. And the servant says, no, he's off in the marketplace. He'll be back in a while. And the man says, well, here, would you be sure to give this to them? And the servant says, of course. And the man walks away, and the servant goes back in the house. And a little more time goes by, and Avram comes back. And the servant says, we had a visitor. And he hands him the envelope. Payment of Eliezer's loan. And he opens it up, and there's 1,000 rubles in there. And he can't understand how this could possibly have happened. He looks at the envelope, and there it is. It's written. That's who's it for. And the rubles are legitimate rubles. And he looks up, and here comes Eliezer, whose heart is broken because he knows he has to tell Avram that he can't pay back the loan. And Avram runs over to him and says, Eliezer, I'm so glad. I'm so thankful. I never expected to see this money. And Eliezer says, what are you talking about? I didn't pay you back. And he holds up the envelope and says, look, here it is. Here it is. Here's for your payment. Well, the other thing that Hasids do when they don't know what to do is they go talk to the rabbi and figure out what to do. So they go to the Kutzker Rebbe, and finally he returns to the story. And they take the envelope to the Rebbe, and they say, what do we do? Avram says, I forgave the loan. So there is no loan. And Eliezer, well, he had the money and he spent it. What do we do? How did this happen? And the Kutzker Rebbe says, you know, the Holy One paid off the loan. And when you, Eliezer, signed God's name to that, there was a huge commotion in heaven. And Eliezer said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." They said, "No, no, no, no. That's not the problem. The problem was everybody was arguing about who was going to get to be the one to pay it back because they all wanted to pay it back for you."
Oh.
And finally, Elijah, the precursor of the Messiah, said, "It should be me." And the Holy One agreed. And so he came down and he delivered that envelope to your servant. And Avram says, "Oh, if I hadn't gone to the marketplace, I would have met Elijah." And the Rebbe said, "Well, yes. But you know what? You didn't have enough faith in God." "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, you forgave the loan. If you hadn't forgiven the loan, you would have been home to meet Elijah at the time that he came to repay the loan." So Avram and Eliezer said, "Well, okay, amazing, but what do we do with the money?" And the two of them looked at each other and they said, "You know, Rabbi, you should take the money because you'll put it to good use, no matter what." And the Kutzker Rebbe said, "Okay, but if you'll let me have the envelope." And they said, "Of course." Now, there are no stories that talk about how the 1,000 rubles was used. But we do know that when the Kutzker Rebbe was on his deathbed, his primary disciple came up to him and he gave him the envelope.
Amazing. What a great story. Oh my God. So I love the red thread of story. And over the weekend, we had this discussion about currencies because money is a currency, but time is a currency.
Mm-hmm.
Happiness is a currency. Connection is a currency. So I love the fact that there is a bit of a red thread of story. And coming to me out of the melee of that, out of the steamy pot of story in heart connection to your story, is a story that coalesced for me last year. It's called She Machtira, which means the she wolf. And the first part of it came to me in a dream, and I'm going to tell that through the story. Is Misha Machtira. She Machtira. Toi Mimachoni. Heaven Lee. In Maskna She. Is Misha. She. Oh. Brendan could not close his eyes and go to sleep because when he did, he'd hear those words and he'd feel the beat beneath his feet, whether he was lying down or whether he was standing up. If he closed his eyes and allowed himself to go to that mid-space, the drums would start and he'd hear those words. And he wondered, why are they coming to me in Antiang and Triachta in the Irish language when I haven't spoken a word of Irish since I left school, and it was never one of those subjects that I loved? He was a scientist to his bone, and he had a great job in the university hospital, and he wanted to make sure that there was no disease left by the time he'd finish his work. But this kept happening. And who could he tell? Who in the scientific minds around him would understand this ancient beat and these old words? And then she came. The university hospital, in line with the best practices, were bringing in these weird people. The people who did yoga, the people who said you had to breathe in a box. And now they were bringing in the storyteller. He remembered when she walked through the door and how all the air seemed to lighten, and how there seemed to be a breeze in that place with no air, and how even under the harsh light of the hospitals, she looked magical. She looked mystical. And despite himself, he found himself going to the lecture theatre where she would tell the stories. She entranced them. She brought them away to worlds where silkies lived, where Coppelbawn and Mara, the white horses of the sea that were not made of blood and bone and marrow, but were made of sea and spray and spirit, where they lived and where they were as real as you or I. And in the middle of the telling of the tales, she found his eyes, and she looked at him deep into his soul. He was sure that she could see all of his secret feelings. And when that magical hour of stories came to an end, and the people began to reluctantly file out of that room, he hung back until there was only herself and the people that had invited her and him. And he came up and she put out her hands and he put his hands into hers, and there was a feeling of electricity. And she looked at him with those storytelling eyes that saw everything. "You're hearing it, aren't you?" she asked him. "No need for explanations here." "I am," he said. "What are you hearing, and who are you hearing it from?" "Is Misha Maktira. She Maktira." He resonated, counting it out to her like precious gems, and her eyes lit up, and the smile couldn't leave her face. "She lives in the Ceodriachta," she said. "She lives in the magical mist of Ireland, the she-wolf. She's calling you. Go out and find her." He delayed, of course he did. He delayed, and he tried to get on with his Excel spreadsheets, and he tried to get on with his projects, but the prodding and the insisting would not go away. So he made up a backpack, a little tent, a ground sheet, a sleeping bag, a flask of tea, the only hot thing that he would drink in the days to come, and a little bit of food. And he walked up those streets of Cork, those city streets with the yellow lights and the cars everywhere and the beeping and the life of it. And he walked up Dublin Hill towards the old Black Man pub. And there where the road divides, he took the left-hand road, and he found an old rusty gate, and he pushed it open. And in the city, he found himself in this wild place. He could almost hear the wolf's cry through the trees, and he thought, "I'm fancying things now. This is not true." He began to walk under the light of the moon, and the moon tickled his spirit down to the edge of the river. He took off his big boots and his socks, and he put his feet in the flowing waters of that river under the moonlight, and the Ceodriachta began to rise, wisps at first, and he could feel the beat beneath his feet. Misha Maktira. She Maktira. And he gave into it, and he followed the river, and it brought him to flat stones, and he stood up out of the water, and he put his feet on the stone, and it felt alive and warm under the moonlight. And then he realized he was at the edge of the forest. He could see fields, and he could see for miles, for he had reached Murphy's Rock. Murphy's Rock of Cork. He could see Shandoon in the distance, ancient Shandon. And then he felt the loss of the trees. As he looked at these fields, his soul remembered that this country once was a complete rainforest, where a red squirrel could alight a tree in Cork and make her way all the way to the tip of Antrim with ever having to come down out of the crowns of those trees. And as he remembered, a strange thing happened. He saw the ghost of those trees in the field. He felt the rightness of it. He knew that this land wanted trees. And when the trees were there, she could come back because she would have a home. Shimach Tira. He didn't pause to think. He didn't pause for logic. He began to look for young shoots and old seeds, and he began to plant them. And a strange thing happened. As he planted, and as he made his life in those outdoors, others came, hearing the call, helping him in his work. And they were alone and happy in their work for days and weeks and months and a precious few years until the trees took root. And a man in a yellow jacket came with a clipboard and a big yellow machine, and he wanted to dig up those trees. Brendan ran to the edge of them and he put his arms out. "Leave the children of the forest alone," he said. And the man looked at him and he said, "Hereby, this is my job. I've been told to clear the land." "No," said Brendan, "don't do it. You'll have luck for it." And with those old words, "you'll have luck for it," the scientist hit a part of that man's heart. And he turned around and he went home that night. But Brendan knew he would be back, and so did the people. And they would come to the edge of the trees every night and sing their old songs and hope for the tree's sake that they could get big enough to hold their own. But the man came back in the yellow jacket, and a man in a suit next to him and a clipboard with official writing on it. "Not this night," said Brendan, for he knew not what else to say. And the people took up the chant, "Not this night, not this night, not this night." And the man in the suit and a man in the yellow jacket and the yellow machine were turned out one more time. But they knew that it wouldn't stop there. And the next time that people came, they had chains and official police, and the man in the yellow jacket with his yellow machine, and the man in the suit with his official clipboard. "We're done playing now," they said. "We're done playing. Give up. We're taking the land back." And the people said, "Don't do it. Not this time. Not this time." And it was answered by the clinking of chains and the yellow machine making its way forward. And Brendan said, "Don't you remember our old stories? Don't you remember our portals and how the land has a life of its own?" And the man in the yellow jacket stopped the machine. "You'll have no luck for digging it up here. Don't you know the stories of the sheep?" The man jumped down off of his yellow machine and said, "Yes, my uncle didn't have one day of luck after he put a fairy fort under his tractor." He began to walk down the road, and the man with the suit and the clipboard said, "Well, if you fall out, if you fall away, someone else will fall in and this land will be overtaken." and the people's hearts went into their boots. But the Ceodriachta thickened at his words, and out of the mist came a silver snout, and above that silver snout came beautiful blue blazing eyes. And in the throng, in the beat under their feet, they felt the old song, and the people held hands, and as if they had learned it, as if they knew the words, they began to chant, Ismisha Maktira, She Maktira, Taimimachoni, Hevan Lee, Imaskna She, Ismisha, She, oh. And the She Maktira sang to the sky, sang to the moon, as she hadn't done in many years on Irish soil. Shine Mushkea, that is my story.
Oh, what a powerful story. And there's real power in that tongue that is not spoken by so many. Thank you.
Paulcha, welcome.
So this story came to you in a dream.
Yeah, the words came to me, and I was shocked because, like the person in the story, Irish wouldn't be my first tongue, but it resonates in my bones, and it comes up in the stories. So I looked up the verse, and it doesn't exist anywhere. So
Really?
I caught it.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, as I'm thinking about our podcast, when you first said the words, I thought, oh, we've got to be sure to come back and translate them. And then I said, no, I don't want to rob them of their power. No,
Yeah.
seriously.
Yeah.
In the Jewish tradition, most Jews don't speak Hebrew. It's an old language, at least in this country. And there are a lot of arguments about whether you should translate the prayers from Hebrew to English or not. And one of the sides of that argument is not knowing them gives them an extra power, that there's this resonance to them with our heart and our soul. I feel that way. What you've just told us, that there's a real power to them that comes from them not being known to me, but it's still there. It's still there.
I would like to tell you what they mean in English, and I came to the same conclusion as you. I was translating them in the story, and then I was thinking, no, it's too cumbersome.
Yeah.
And it takes away from the rhythm. But what they mean is, I am the wolf. I am the she-wolf. I live in Cork at the bank of the river, and I live in the middle of the fair folk, of the good people. And then she at the end, S-I father means female, and S-I-D-H-E, both said in the same word, in the same way, she and she. So S-I father means female, and then she means of the fairies. So it's the female of the fairies, and it's a wolf.
Yes.
So
wow.
and you have to explain it in the English language, but in the Irish language, it's just she.
Yeah. Wonderful. Good to know, but I agree with your choice there to not translate them in the telling. Yeah.
Because in every other instance, when I tell in something in Irish, I always translate it. So it's an aberration from the rules.
Well, those are the best usually.
Yeah.
I won't tell the story that came to me. We'll save it for another time.
Okay.
But there's a story that touched me as you were telling yours, and it's about a couple who can't have children. And the reason they can't have children is that they built their house out of trees that were cut down before their time. And the pain of the forest from whom those children were taken drives away the angel of conception, so that until they repaired the damage and replanted trees and asked for forgiveness for what they had done, this was the price they paid. So it runs deep. It runs deep.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a good place for us to draw things to a close.
It feels like that this week, doesn't it,
Yeah,
Jim?
it does.
Yeah. The
Sometimes
pace is different.
the pace is different, and sometimes, Maria, I love to just soak in the energies, not try to explain them.
Will we say goodbye from Cork?
And goodbye from New York, but only for a while, because we'll be back again with another episode. Absolutely.
We can't wait to see you on the Story Road one more time. And from this time till that, be safe on the Story Road.